In 10 minutes, the woman they were about to kick out would shut down the entire bank branch and lock everyone inside. When Isabella walked into her own Miami branch dressed casually, the manager immediately assumed she couldn't afford private banking services. The discrimination escalated when they demanded she log into her accounts on a public tablet to prove her worthiness, then gave her 5 minutes to verify her funds or face security removal. That's when Isabella made one phone call. Code 6, integrity breach. Initiate system-wide service freeze. Every screen turned red, reading branch services suspended, as doors locked and transactions froze. The manager who had been humiliating Isabella just discovered she was the CEO who owned the entire banking network. What happened when this discriminator found herself trapped inside her own workplace with the woman she tried to exclude will show you what real corporate justice looks like.
In exactly 10 minutes, the woman walking through those gleaming glass doors would shut down an entire bank branch, lock every employee inside, and expose a discrimination scandal that would make national headlines. Isabella Rossi adjusted her pale blue cashmere sweater as she entered the Miami branch of Summit Wealth Bank, her dark wash jeans and understated elegance creating the perfect disguise for what was about to unfold. To anyone watching, she looked like just another affluent client conducting routine business, but they had no idea they were witnessing the arrival of the most powerful person in the building. What made this moment so extraordinary wasn't just Isabella's hidden identity as the CEO and founder of Summit Enterprises, the multi-billion-dollar conglomerate that owned every square inch of this marble and glass temple to wealth. It was the fact that she had built her empire from absolutely nothing, starting as a young woman with a dream and a relentless work ethic that had transformed her from overlooked underdog to one of the most influential business leaders in America. Today's visit served a dual purpose that would soon prove devastating for anyone who failed her test. On the surface, Isabella was here to conduct a significant personal transaction, a large cash withdrawal that required the kind of private banking services reserved for the institution's most valued clients. But beneath that legitimate business need lay something far more important: a covert stress test of her own company's zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. Isabella had spent millions of dollars implementing comprehensive training programs designed to ensure that every customer, regardless of their appearance, background, or perceived economic status, would receive the same level of respect and service. She had personally overseen the development of protocols that were supposed to eliminate bias from every interaction, creating an environment where character and courtesy mattered more than assumptions and prejudice. But policies written in corporate boardrooms often looked different when implemented in the real world, and Isabella knew that the only way to truly measure her company's commitment to equality was to experience their service as an ordinary customer. She had conducted these unannounced assessments at dozens of locations across her banking network, and most had passed with flying colors, proving that good training and strong leadership could create genuine change. However, some branches had revealed troubling patterns of discrimination that required immediate intervention. When bias was discovered, Isabella's response was swift and uncompromising, but it usually involved individual consequences like retraining or termination. Today, she was about to encounter a level of institutional prejudice that would require a response unlike anything she had ever deployed before. The Miami branch represented everything Isabella had worked to achieve: cutting-edge technology, luxurious amenities, and a client base that included some of the most successful individuals in the region. If discrimination could flourish here, in this showcase location with its highly trained staff and prestigious reputation, then her entire approach to corporate culture might need fundamental reconstruction. As Isabella approached the reception desk, she carried with her not just the authority to transform lives and careers, but the weight of every person who had ever been judged unfairly based on their appearance. In the next few minutes, she would discover whether her own employees honored the values she had spent years instilling, or whether they would provide her with all the justification needed to demonstrate that some problems require solutions as dramatic as the discrimination itself. If you believe that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity regardless of how they look or what they wear, smash that like button right now. Share in the comments a time when you were underestimated because of your appearance. And don't forget to subscribe, because what Isabella is about to do to expose this discrimination will prove that sometimes the most powerful response to prejudice is having the authority to shut it down completely. But the moment Isabella approached the polished reception desk and made her request, everything she had built her company to prevent came crashing down in the most spectacular display of corporate arrogance she had ever witnessed. The young receptionist's eyes widened slightly when Isabella mentioned needing private banking services for a substantial cash withdrawal, and within minutes, she was being escorted through a corridor lined with original artwork toward the exclusive private client lounge that represented the pinnacle of her bank's luxury offerings. What happened next would prove that discrimination could flourish even in the most prestigious environments when the wrong people were given authority over others. Karen Miller, the branch manager, emerged from her office like a queen surveying her domain, her sharp business suit and perfectly styled hair creating an aura of self-satisfied authority that immediately set Isabella's internal alarm bells ringing. This was exactly the kind of person who used professional power as a weapon against anyone who didn't meet their narrow definition of worthy clientele. Karen's assessment of Isabella was swift, cold, and devastating in its casual cruelty. Her eyes swept from Isabella's dark wash jeans to her pale blue cashmere sweater with the kind of dismissive calculation that suggested years of practice in judging people's worth based on their appearance rather than their account balances. The smile that spread across Karen's face wasn't welcoming. It was predatory, the expression of someone who believed she had just caught a fraud in the act. "I'm sorry," Karen said, her voice dripping with false courtesy that barely concealed her condescension, "but our private client services are reserved for customers with a minimum portfolio of $1 million. Perhaps the standard tellers can assist you with whatever you need?" The words hung in the air like poison, transforming the elegant atmosphere of the private lounge into something ugly and exclusionary. Karen had just made the fatal assumption that someone dressed casually couldn't possibly qualify for premium banking services, revealing exactly the kind of bias that Isabella had spent years trying to eliminate from her organization. More than that, she had delivered her rejection with the kind of smug satisfaction that suggested she genuinely enjoyed turning people away. What Karen couldn't have known was that she had just discriminated against the person who had personally designed the training programs she had obviously ignored, who had approved her salary and benefits package, and who had the authority to shut down her entire workplace with a single phone call. The irony was staggering. A branch manager was using company policies to exclude the very person who had created those policies to ensure equal treatment for everyone. Isabella's response was a masterclass in controlled composure that revealed the depth of her experience, dealing with discrimination throughout her rise to corporate leadership. She didn't raise her voice, didn't demand to speak to a supervisor, didn't threaten legal action, or reveal her identity. Instead, she simply stood there with the kind of calm dignity that comes from knowing you hold all the power in a situation, even when the other person believes they control everything. "I believe my accounts meet your criteria," Isabella said quietly, her tone carrying just enough steel to suggest that Karen might want to reconsider her assumptions. But Karen Miller was too intoxicated by her own authority to recognize the danger she was walking into. She had no idea that her next words would trigger a corporate response that would make her branch the center of a discrimination scandal, lock her inside her own workplace, and transform her from gatekeeper to cautionary tale in less time than it takes to process a simple banking transaction. The countdown to institutional justice had begun, and Karen Miller had just provided all the evidence needed to justify what was coming next. What happened next proved that some people's prejudice runs so deep that calm professionalism only emboldens them to reveal their true character in increasingly humiliating ways. Instead of taking Isabella's quiet assertion as a hint to perhaps check her account status before making assumptions, Karen Miller's expression shifted into something far more dangerous, the smug satisfaction of someone who believed she had just caught a fraud red-handed and was about to enjoy exposing it. Karen's laugh was sharp and dismissive, the sound of someone who had clearly dealt with what she assumed were countless attempts by unqualified people to access services they didn't deserve. "I'll need to see proof of funds," she announced with the authority of a customs agent catching a smuggler. "We can't just take your word for it. We have protocols to prevent fraud, and frankly, appearances can be deceiving." The accusation hung in the air like a slap. Karen had just directly called Isabella's integrity into question, essentially labeling her a potential criminal based solely on her decision to dress comfortably rather than ostentatiously. This wasn't just poor customer service. This was systematic dehumanization designed to embarrass someone into leaving quietly rather than challenging the discriminatory treatment. But Karen wasn't finished demonstrating exactly why her branch was about to become the subject of a corporate investigation that would make national headlines. With the theatrical flair of someone who genuinely believed she was performing a public service, she gestured toward a bank tablet sitting on the lounge's coffee table, its screen facing outward for everyone in the room to see. "I'll need you to log into your online banking on this public tablet to verify your account status," Karen declared, her voice carrying the false authority of someone who had just invented a policy on the spot. This is standard procedure for clients who can't provide immediate proof of their qualifications for premium services. The demand was so outrageous, so deliberately humiliating, that it took Isabella's breath away. In her years of conducting covert assessments across her banking network, she had never encountered anything this brazenly inappropriate. Karen was essentially demanding that Isabella expose her private financial information on a public-facing device in front of other clients, treating her like a suspected criminal rather than a potential customer. What made the situation even more appalling was that this wasn't actually standard procedure at all. Karen was improvising a humiliation tactic designed to force Isabella to either comply with degrading treatment or leave in embarrassment. No legitimate banking institution would ever require a client to display their private account information on a public tablet, especially not in a lounge where other customers could observe every detail. Isabella stood perfectly still, her composure unshakable despite the fire building in her chest. She had faced discrimination countless times throughout her career, but this level of institutional cruelty was something entirely different. This wasn't just bias. This was a branch manager who had weaponized her authority to create systematic humiliation for anyone who didn't meet her arbitrary standards of worthiness. The tablet sat on the coffee table like a trap, its screen glowing with the promise of public embarrassment. Karen crossed her arms with the satisfaction of someone who believed she had just delivered a checkmate move, forcing Isabella to either humiliate herself or admit that she didn't belong in the exclusive lounge. What Karen couldn't possibly have imagined was that the woman she was trying to humiliate had the power to shut down her entire branch, lock the doors, and turn her workplace into the epicenter of a discrimination scandal that would reshape how financial institutions across the country handle customer service. The trap Karen thought she had set was about to become her own professional execution chamber. The clock was ticking toward the most spectacular delivery of corporate justice ever witnessed in the banking industry. But just as the humiliating standoff reached its peak, two unexpected voices entered the conversation that would prove how discrimination doesn't happen in a vacuum, but rather thrives when good people stay silent and toxic attitudes find validation from unlikely sources. The private lounge, which had been a sanctuary of quiet elegance just minutes earlier, was about to become a stage where character would be revealed and alliances would form in the most surprising ways. The first voice belonged to Chadwick Vance, a distinguished-looking man in his 60s who had been quietly reading the Wall Street Journal in the corner of the lounge. His expensive suit, Rolex watch, and obvious comfort in the exclusive environment marked him as exactly the kind of client Karen believed belonged in this space. When he looked up from his newspaper and took in the scene unfolding before him, his response would reveal how easily prejudice finds support from people who should know better. "She's absolutely right," Chadwick said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard and respected. "You can't be too careful these days. There are all sorts of people trying to game the system, and frankly, the bank has every right to protect itself and its legitimate clients." His words landed like validation for Karen's discriminatory behavior, giving her the confidence boost she needed to continue her systematic humiliation of Isabella. Chadwick's support wasn't just passive agreement. It was active encouragement of discrimination from someone whose obvious wealth and status gave his opinion weight in Karen's mind. He had essentially provided her with social permission to continue treating Isabella like a suspected criminal. But the second voice that entered the conversation would prove that not everyone in positions of power chooses to use that power to diminish others. Leo Zhang, a young banker who had been quietly observing the interaction while preparing to bring refreshments to the lounge, approached with a glass of water for Isabella, his movements careful and deliberate, in a way that suggested he was thinking much more deeply about what he was witnessing than anyone realized. Leo had been working at the bank for only 8 months, but his training had been thorough and his instincts were sharp. As he set the water glass down beside Isabella with genuine courtesy, his eyes caught the irregularities in Karen's behavior that others might have missed. The demand for public verification of private financial information wasn't just unusual. It was completely against every protocol he had been taught about protecting client confidentiality and maintaining professional dignity. More importantly, Leo recognized something in Isabella's demeanor that set off every alarm bell in his professional consciousness. Her calm wasn't the resignation of someone caught in fraud. It was the controlled composure of someone who knew exactly what was happening and was allowing it to continue for reasons that went far beyond this single interaction. There was an authority in her stillness that suggested she was gathering evidence rather than being victimized, and that realization made Leo deeply uncomfortable with his manager's behavior. As Leo stepped back from delivering the water, he tried to catch Karen's eye with a subtle but urgent expression that clearly communicated his concern. He couldn't directly challenge his supervisor in front of clients, but his body language and facial expressions were desperately trying to signal that she was making a terrible mistake. His training had emphasized that irregular demands for account verification should always be handled privately and with extreme sensitivity to client privacy. But Karen was too intoxicated by Chadwick's validation and her own sense of authority to notice Leo's warning signals. She was operating under the dangerous assumption that having one wealthy client's support for her discriminatory behavior somehow legitimized her actions and protected her from consequences. What she didn't realize was that Leo's concern wasn't just professional courtesy, it was the recognition that something was fundamentally wrong with the entire situation. The dynamics in the room had crystallized into a perfect representation of how discrimination perpetuates itself in professional environments. Chadwick's privileged validation gave Karen the social cover she needed to continue her humiliating treatment of Isabella, while Leo's principled concern was being ignored because his voice carried less institutional weight than a wealthy client's approval. What none of them could have anticipated was that Isabella's patience wasn't submission. It was strategy. Every word of support for discrimination, every moment of complicit silence, every instance of principled concern being overlooked was being mentally cataloged as evidence for the systematic response that was about to reshape not just this branch, but potentially the entire banking industry's approach to customer service and professional accountability. The stage was set, the characters had revealed themselves, and the countdown to institutional justice was about to accelerate in ways that would shock everyone in that elegant lounge. If you're as outraged as I am watching this systematic discrimination unfold with wealthy clients supporting prejudice while principled employees are ignored, smash that like button to show your support for people like Leo who recognize when something is wrong even when they don't have the power to stop it. Comment below with fire emojis if you believe that staying silent in the face of discrimination makes you complicit. And hit subscribe because what Isabella is about to do will prove that sometimes the most powerful response to institutional prejudice is having the authority to shut down the entire system. What happened next would push this already explosive situation past the point of no return, triggering a corporate response so swift and devastating that it would reshape how discrimination is handled in financial institutions across America forever. Emboldened by Chadwick's validation and interpreting Leo's concern as weakness rather than wisdom, Karen Miller made the fatal decision to escalate her humiliating treatment of Isabella into something that would justify the nuclear option that was about to be deployed against her entire workplace. Karen's confidence had transformed into something dangerous and reckless, fueled by the intoxicating combination of institutional authority and social validation from a wealthy client. She had convinced herself that she was protecting the bank's interests and maintaining proper standards, when in reality she was about to trigger the most spectacular example of corporate accountability ever witnessed in the banking industry. "Listen," Karen announced, her voice carrying the false authority of someone who believed she held all the cards in this confrontation. "If you cannot verify your funds within the next 5 minutes, I will have to ask you to leave the premises. This is a private client lounge, and we have standards to maintain for our legitimate customers." The ultimatum hung in the air like a death sentence. But what Karen didn't realize was that she had just provided Isabella with all the justification needed to demonstrate exactly what happened when discrimination met real corporate power. The 5-minute deadline wasn't just an arbitrary threat. It was about to become the countdown to the complete shutdown of everything Karen thought she controlled. Isabella's response was so calm, so deliberate, so utterly devastating in its quiet authority that it would be replayed in business schools for decades as an example of how true power operates. Instead of reaching for the humiliating public tablet that Karen had demanded she use, instead of arguing or pleading or threatening legal action, Isabella simply reached into her purse and pulled out her own phone. The movement was so casual, so unremarkable, that for a moment nobody in the lounge understood they were witnessing the activation of a corporate response system designed specifically to deal with discrimination at the highest levels. Isabella's fingers moved across the screen with the practiced precision of someone who had deployed this protocol before, and when she raised the phone to her ear, her voice carried an authority that seemed to change the very atmosphere of the room. "Anita," Isabella said, and there was something in the way she spoke that single name that made Leo's blood run cold with recognition that this was not an ordinary phone call. "It's Isabella. We have a Code 6 integrity breach at the Miami branch." The words Code 6 integrity breach struck Leo like lightning. His comprehensive training had covered every emergency protocol in the Summit Enterprises manual, and Code 6 was the designation reserved for systematic discrimination that required immediate executive intervention. Only the highest levels of corporate authority could initiate a Code 6, and the protocols that followed were designed to preserve evidence, protect victims, and ensure that discriminatory behavior faced immediate and comprehensive consequences. But Isabella wasn't finished delivering the corporate death sentence that would transform Karen's workplace from a symbol of exclusivity into a cautionary tale about the consequences of institutional prejudice. Her voice remained steady, almost conversational, as she continued speaking into the phone with the kind of calm certainty that comes from having absolute authority over the situation. "Prepare to initiate a system-wide service freeze for this location," Isabella continued, each word landing like a hammer blow against Karen's suddenly crumbling confidence. Authorization to follow in 10 minutes. The phrase system-wide service freeze was not part of standard banking terminology, and both Karen and Chadwick exchanged confused glances as they tried to process what they were hearing. But Leo knew exactly what those words meant, and the color drained from his face as he realized that Isabella wasn't just threatening consequences. She was activating a corporate response that would shut down every operation in the branch, lock all the doors, and essentially turn the building into a controlled environment where evidence could be preserved and accountability could be delivered. 10 minutes. In 10 minutes, everything Karen thought she knew about power and authority was about to be turned upside down. In 10 minutes, the woman she had been trying to humiliate would reveal herself to be the person with ultimate control over her professional future. In 10 minutes, a simple case of customer service discrimination was about to become a corporate restructuring that would make national headlines. The countdown had begun, and there was no stopping what was coming next. The quiet command had been given, and the most powerful response to discrimination in banking history was about to be deployed with devastating precision. But at the exact moment, Karen and Chadwick were dismissing Isabella's phone call as some kind of elaborate bluff. The banking industry's most sophisticated corporate security system was activating protocols that would transform their skepticism into absolute terror within seconds. While they scoffed at terms like Code 6 and system-wide service freeze, treating them as meaningless jargon from someone desperately trying to save face, Leo Jiang was experiencing the kind of professional horror that comes from recognizing that your workplace is about to become the epicenter of a corporate earthquake. Leo's training had been comprehensive, but nothing had prepared him for witnessing a Code 6 activation in real time. His hands shaking with the sudden understanding of what was unfolding before him, he rushed to his terminal with the desperate urgency of someone trying to confirm their worst fears. As his fingers flew across the keyboard, entering security protocols he had learned but never expected to use, the screen began displaying information that made his blood freeze in his veins. "This is ridiculous," Karen laughed, her voice carrying the false bravado of someone who was beginning to suspect that her confident dismissal might be premature. "System-wide service freeze? Code 6? What kind of made-up corporate nonsense is that supposed to be?" But even as Karen spoke, Leo's terminal was painting a picture that would haunt his nightmares for years to come. A high-level security alert had just been triggered, attached to Isabella Rossi's name, and the authorization codes being displayed were unlike anything he had ever seen in his months of employment. These weren't standard customer service flags or routine account notifications. These were executive-level security protocols that suggested the person sitting calmly in their lounge possessed authority that extended far beyond normal banking relationships. Chadwick joined Karen's dismissive laughter, his voice dripping with the condescension of someone who believed that wealth automatically conferred superior judgment. "She's probably calling her friend who works at a different bank, trying to create some kind of scene to embarrass you into giving her what she wants. I've seen this kind of manipulative behavior before." Their laughter died instantly when Leo's voice cut through their mockery like a blade through silk. "Karen," he stammered, his words barely audible as the full implications of what he was seeing crashed over him like a tsunami of professional dread. "Her name, it's flagged with an executive override. She's on the board of directors." The silence that followed was so complete it seemed to vacuum all sound from the elegantly appointed lounge. Karen's face went through a series of expressions that would have been fascinating to study if the situation weren't so devastating. Confusion, disbelief, dawning comprehension, and finally a terror so pure it seemed to physically transform her features. But Leo's revelation was only the beginning of the nightmare that was about to unfold. As he continued to scroll through the security alerts cascading across his screen, each new piece of information painted a picture of authority so vast, so absolute, that it redefined everything they thought they knew about power and consequences in the corporate world. "There's more," Leo whispered, his voice breaking as he tried to process what the system was telling him. "The executive override isn't just board level. This is CEO level authorization. The system is showing ownership protocols. She has administrative control over our entire branch network." The words hit Karen like physical blows, each revelation stripping away another layer of the confidence that had carried her through years of gatekeeping and discrimination. Board of directors was terrifying enough, but CEO-level authorization meant that she had just spent the last 20 minutes systematically humiliating the person who literally owned her job, her workplace, and her professional future. Chadwick's face had gone ashen as the implications began to penetrate his wealthy bubble of assumed superiority. He had just enthusiastically supported the discrimination of someone who possessed the kind of corporate authority that could blacklist him from financial institutions across the entire region. His validation of Karen's behavior hadn't just been morally wrong, it had been strategically catastrophic. But the most chilling revelation was still coming. As Leo's terminal continued to update with real-time information, the scope of Isabella's authority became clear in ways that redefined their understanding of what corporate power actually meant. This wasn't just about one bank branch or even one banking network. This was about a level of business influence that could reshape entire industries. "Karen," Leo said, his voice now barely a whisper as he read the final piece of information that would complete their understanding of just how comprehensively they had destroyed their own futures. "She doesn't just have CEO authorization. She owns the company. Isabella Rossi is the founder and CEO of Summit Enterprises. She owns every bank in our network. She owns this building. She owns everything." The revelation was so stunning, so completely outside the realm of what they had believed possible, that for a moment nobody could speak. The woman Karen had been treating like a potential fraud was actually the person who had created the very policies Karen had been violating, who had designed the training programs Karen had ignored, who had built the corporate culture that Karen had been systematically destroying. Isabella continued to sit calmly in her chair, her phone call completed, watching as the full weight of recognition settled over the people who had spent the last half hour providing her with all the evidence she would ever need to justify what was about to happen to their workplace. The countdown was still ticking, and now they knew exactly who was controlling the clock. What followed was the most swift and devastating delivery of corporate justice ever witnessed in the banking industry, proving that when discrimination is exposed at the highest levels of institutional power, consequences can be immediate, comprehensive, and absolutely inescapable. The moment Karen Miller realized she had been systematically humiliating the person who literally owned her entire professional existence, her transformation from arrogant gatekeeper to desperate supplicant was so complete it seemed to happen in slow motion. Karen's attempts at damage control were pathetic in their transparency and devastating in their futility. Her voice cracked with desperation as she stumbled over words that would have been meaningless even if they had been sincere. "Miss Rossi, I had no idea who you were. This is all a terrible misunderstanding. I was just following standard protocols to protect the bank's interests." But her frantic apologies fell on deaf ears because Isabella had already heard everything she needed to make her decision. The discrimination hadn't been a momentary lapse in judgment or a misunderstanding about policies. It had been systematic, deliberate, and cruel, designed to humiliate someone based solely on their appearance and perceived economic status. Karen had weaponized her authority to create a degrading experience that violated every principle Isabella had spent years implementing throughout her organization. Isabella's response was delivered with the cold precision of someone who had built a multi-billion-dollar empire by making difficult decisions and following through on them without hesitation. She raised her phone once more, and when she spoke, her voice carried the absolute authority of someone who was about to demonstrate exactly what happened when institutional discrimination met unlimited corporate power. "Anita," Isabella said, her words cutting through Karen's desperate pleas like a blade through paper, "authorize the freeze, Now, the effect was instantaneous and absolutely devastating in its comprehensiveness. Every computer monitor throughout the branch flickered once, then displayed the same message in bold red letters that would haunt Karen's nightmares for the rest of her career. Branch services temporarily suspended by executive order. The words seemed to pulse on the screens like a heartbeat, marking the death of everything Karen had believed about her own authority and job security. But the visual display was only the beginning of the systematic shutdown that would transform the Miami branch from a symbol of financial prestige into a corporate cautionary tale. Throughout the building, electronic systems began executing protocols that had been designed specifically for situations where institutional discrimination required immediate and comprehensive response. The automatic doors at the front entrance engaged their emergency locks with an audible click that echoed through the marble lobby like a gunshot. The elevators stopped on their current floors and would not respond to call buttons. The security system shifted into lockdown mode, ensuring that everyone currently inside the building would remain there until the situation was fully resolved and documented. Customer transactions that had been in progress suddenly halted mid-process, their screens displaying the same executive order message that was now visible throughout the branch. Teller windows went dark as cash machines locked themselves and card readers became inoperative. The sophisticated banking network that had been humming with activity just moments before was now completely frozen, transformed into a monument to the consequences of institutional prejudice. Karen watched in horror as her workplace was systematically dismantled around her, each darkened screen and locked door representing another nail in the coffin of her career. She had never imagined that such comprehensive shutdown capabilities even existed, let alone that she would be responsible for triggering them through her own discriminatory behavior. Chadwick Vance, who had been so confident in his support for Karen's treatment of Isabella, now found himself trapped in the very building where he had enthusiastically validated discrimination. His wealthy privilege, which had always protected him from consequences, was now meaningless in the face of corporate authority that operated on a completely different level than anything he had ever encountered. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of the shutdown was its silent efficiency. There were no alarms, no dramatic announcements, no chaos or confusion. The branch simply stopped functioning, as if someone had reached into the heart of its operations and turned off a switch. The quiet professionalism of the lockdown made it even more terrifying, demonstrating a level of corporate control that was both absolute and surgically precise. Isabella stood up slowly, her movement drawing every eye in the room as she prepared to deliver the verdict that would complete Karen's understanding of just how comprehensively she had destroyed her own future. Her voice carried the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence, each word carefully chosen to maximize both impact and understanding. "I'm not firing you, Karen," Isabella said, her tone conveying the kind of cold satisfaction that comes from delivering perfect justice. "I'm shutting down your workplace. This branch's operations are suspended indefinitely, pending a full investigation and complete staff retraining. You just cost this bank millions of dollars in a single day." The implications of Isabella's words were staggering. Karen wasn't just losing her job, she was losing her entire professional environment. The branch that had been her kingdom, where she had exercised discriminatory authority over countless customers, was now closed because of her actions. Every employee, every customer relationship, every business operation had been halted because she had chosen to treat someone like garbage based on their appearance. But Isabella wasn't finished demonstrating the scope of consequences that systematic discrimination could trigger when it met unlimited corporate authority. Her next words would prove that the shutdown was just the beginning of a transformation that would reshape not just this single location, but potentially the entire banking industry's approach to customer service and professional accountability. Furthermore, Isabella continued, her voice gaining strength as she outlined the comprehensive response that would ensure this kind of discrimination could never happen again. High-level regional executives are being ordered to this branch immediately. They will conduct a complete audit of every customer interaction, every policy implementation, and every training program failure that allowed this systematic discrimination to flourish. The branch that Karen had controlled through intimidation and prejudice was about to become a laboratory for corporate transformation, a place where every aspect of discriminatory behavior would be studied, documented, and used to create training programs that would protect future customers from experiencing similar treatment. Karen Miller had wanted to know who belonged in her exclusive lounge, and now she had her answer. People who understood that true authority comes from creating environments where everyone is treated with dignity, not from the power to exclude and humiliate others. But what happened next proved that true justice isn't just about punishment. It's about transformation that creates lasting change to protect countless future victims from ever experiencing the same discrimination that had flourished unchallenged in this prestigious institution. As the locked doors of the Miami branch became a symbol of corporate accountability, Isabella Rossi prepared to demonstrate that real leadership means using moments of crisis to rebuild entire systems rather than simply destroying the people who had failed them. Within 30 minutes of the branch shutdown, the parking lot began filling with vehicles that represented the highest levels of corporate authority in the Summit Enterprises network. Regional vice presidents, compliance directors, and senior executives who normally operated from boardrooms hundreds of miles away were now converging on this single location because Isabella had transformed a routine discrimination incident into a corporate emergency that would reshape how the entire banking industry approached customer service. Karen Miller, Chadwick Vance, and the other staff members found themselves in the surreal position of being trapped inside the very building they had used to exclude and humiliate others. The irony was so complete, so perfectly calibrated, that it seemed designed by cosmic justice itself. They had wanted to control who belonged in their exclusive space, and now they were prisoners in that same space, waiting to face consequences that would redefine their understanding of power and accountability. But perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of Isabella's response was her decision to conduct the initial audit personally, transforming the shutdown from a remote corporate action into an up-close demonstration of leadership that would be studied in business schools for decades. She moved through the locked branch with the authority of someone who had built every policy that had been violated, examining every aspect of the discriminatory culture that had been allowed to flourish under Karen's management. The first person to benefit from Isabella's transformational approach to justice was Leo Jiang, whose principled concern and professional integrity had marked him as someone worthy of advancement rather than punishment. Isabella's announcement was delivered with the same decisive authority she had used to shut down the branch, but now her words carried hope rather than devastation. "Leo," Isabella said, her voice carrying the kind of recognition that could change a person's entire career trajectory, "your behavior today demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership and integrity that Summit Enterprises needs. You recognized that something was wrong even when you didn't have the authority to stop it, and you tried to warn your supervisor despite the potential consequences to your own position." What followed was a promotion that would transform Leo from a junior banker concerned about protocol violations into the person responsible for ensuring that such violations could never happen again. "I'm promoting you to acting branch supervisor, effective immediately," Isabella announced, her words carrying the weight of genuine recognition for moral courage. "Your first responsibility will be to work directly with our regional team to implement new protocols that will prevent discrimination in every aspect of our customer service." The promotion wasn't just a reward for good behavior. It was a strategic placement of someone with demonstrated integrity into a position where he could protect future customers from experiencing the humiliation that Isabella had endured. Leo's elevation from concerned employee to branch supervisor represented the kind of systematic change that transforms individual moments of injustice into institutional protection for everyone. But Isabella's vision extended far beyond personnel changes and policy updates, as she addressed the assembled group of high-level executives who had responded to her emergency call. Her words outlined a transformation that would ripple through the entire banking industry and potentially redefine how financial institutions across America approach issues of discrimination and customer service. A bank branch isn't just a building, Isabella declared, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent years building corporate culture and now had the power to reshape it completely. It's a promise of service. When that promise is broken through systematic discrimination, we don't just patch the problem. We rebuild the entire system from the ground up. The scope of her vision was staggering. The Miami branch wouldn't just reopen with new staff and updated training. It would become a model for anti-discrimination practices that would be implemented throughout the Summit Enterprises network and made available to banking institutions across the country. The discrimination that Karen had perpetuated would be transformed into a powerful force for positive change that would protect millions of future customers. This branch will reopen as our flagship location for inclusive banking practices. Isabella continued, her words outlining a transformation that would turn the site of systematic discrimination into a beacon of equality and respect. Every interaction will be monitored. Every policy will be designed to eliminate bias, and every employee will be trained to understand that our success is measured not by who we exclude, but by how well we serve everyone who walks through our doors. The message Isabella was delivering transcended banking and spoke to anyone who had ever experienced discrimination based on their appearance, background, or perceived economic status. She had demonstrated that when people with real power choose to use that power to create systematic change rather than simply punish individual wrongdoers, the impact can protect countless others from experiencing similar injustice. Karen Miller had wanted to know who belonged in her exclusive lounge, and Isabella had provided the definitive answer. Everyone who understood that true excellence in customer service means creating environments where dignity and respect are universal, not privileges reserved for people who meet arbitrary standards of appearance or wealth. The branch that had been shut down for discrimination would reopen as a symbol of transformation, proving that the most powerful response to institutional prejudice isn't just accountability, but the systematic reconstruction of entire cultures to ensure that such discrimination becomes impossible rather than just punishable. Isabella Rossi had turned 10 minutes of discrimination into a lifetime of protection for future customers, demonstrating that real leadership means using moments of crisis to build systems that serve everyone with equal dignity and respect. Isabella Rossi's story reveals a fundamental truth about discrimination that every person in America needs to understand. The most dangerous prejudice isn't the obvious hatred that everyone can see. It's the systematic gatekeeping that happens in professional environments where people use their authority to exclude others based on appearance and assumptions. What makes this story so powerful isn't just that Karen got her comeuppance, but how Isabella transformed a moment of personal humiliation into a corporate revolution that will protect millions of future customers. From an insider's perspective, this story exposes something that banking executives rarely admit. Discrimination in financial services isn't just about individual bad actors. It's about institutional cultures that reward exclusivity over inclusivity. Karen Miller felt comfortable demanding public verification of private accounts because she believed her authority was absolute and her judgment was unquestionable. Isabella's response proved that real power isn't about having the authority to exclude people, but having the vision and resources to create systems where such exclusion becomes impossible. The lesson here transcends banking and speaks to anyone who has ever been judged by their clothes, their accent, or their perceived economic status. When you encounter discrimination, you have a choice. You can accept it as inevitable, fight it individually, or build something that prevents others from experiencing what you endured. Isabella chose transformation over retaliation, systematic change over personal revenge, and institutional protection over individual satisfaction. What Isabella accomplished in that Miami branch will ripple through the banking industry for decades. But more importantly, she demonstrated that the most effective response to discrimination isn't anger or lawsuits, though both have their place. It's using whatever power you have, whether that's corporate authority, social media platforms, or simply the courage to speak up like Leo did, to create environments where treating people with dignity becomes the only viable option. Karen Miller learned that authority without character is just expensive bullying, but the real victory belongs to every future customer who will walk into that rebuilt branch and be treated with respect regardless of their appearance. The ultimate message is crystal clear. In a world where your victims might literally own you tomorrow, discrimination isn't just morally wrong, it's strategically catastrophic. Isabella turned 10 minutes of prejudice into a lifetime of protection for countless others, proving that the most powerful response to institutional discrimination is having the vision to rebuild entire systems rather than simply punish individual wrongdoers. If this story of systematic justice and corporate transformation opened your eyes to how real change happens when discrimination meets unlimited accountability, smash that like button to support content that shows actual solutions to institutional prejudice. Drop a comment below sharing how you've used whatever power you have to create positive change, or tell us what you would have done if you had Isabella's authority. And if you believe that the best response to discrimination is building systems that make it impossible for others to experience the same pain, subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell, because we're bringing you more incredible stories of people who turn their worst moments into systematic change that protects entire communities. The next story might be even more dramatic than this one, and you won't want to miss how ordinary people are using extraordinary power to create justice in a world that desperately needs it.